The next emerging practice that I'll introduce will be Freeland Buck. They were formed in 2009 by partners David Freeland and Brennan Buck. Freeland Buck is a self-characterized distributed architectural practice that is active in both New York and Los Angeles. David Freeland and Brennan Buck received graduate degrees from the University of California, Los Angeles. Together, through a practice that consists of designing, exhibiting, lecturing, publishing, and teaching, David at SciArc and Brennan at the Yale School of Architecture, they have crafted a bicoastal practice with occasional forays into Middle America and Europe. Freeland Buck have been finalists for the Museum of Modern Art PS1 Young Architects Program and the FIU Emerging Architect Program. They have received the Far Eastern International Digital Architecture Design Award and the Architectural Record Design Vanguard Award, as well as the Los Angeles AIA ArcIS Emerging Architecture Practice Awards. For their design projects, they have won and were twice finalists for the AIA Restaurant Design Award, and for the project Second House, they received a citation from the Los Angeles AIA. To paraphrase them, Freeland Buck make buildings, spaces, and objects whose forms contain spatial sequences that are layered with cultural meaning and visual effects. Representation and drawing, in particular, as a design method and as an autonomous form, are central to their work. Using conventional drawing techniques, embossing, hatching, moire, and perspective, projected as both representation and physical forms, they continuously work the gap between drawing and building. By applying the processes of drawing to fabrication, by deploying three-dimensional drawing techniques at building scale. Spatially, their projects articulate the play of volumes that is experienced through layers and read from specific viewpoints. In the design of houses, surfaces are drawn through the interplay of light on finished articulations. Freeland Buck seeks to synthesize new forms from visual stimuli and representation techniques through the intersection of visual and spatial techniques and organization. Please join me in welcoming David Freeland and Brennan Buck.
Great. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Yolanda. Thanks, Anne and the League for keeping this program going and all the other programs that you produce. So as Yolanda foreshadowed, we're going to talk about building and drawing, and not just drawing as a way to build or a means to build, but those two things on sort of equal footing, each with their own history and conventions and potentials. So we try to look for other ways that they relate, other than as a means to build. We design buildings and structures with drawing-like qualities, and we work through drawings that are abstract, not necessarily representational, as a way to develop ideas for spaces and buildings.
So this talk has been a really nice opportunity to look back over our almost 10 years of practice and collaboration, and we kind of grouped the projects into kind of three different categories. We thought we'd kind of go through those briefly first and then launch into four current projects that we have just completed. Six? Okay, we have more than that, we have six. Two of them are short. Okay, so the first one was an interest in kind of in pattern and fabrication, and interested in kind of a double entendre performance. Patterns as an index of material and structure, as well as using those kinds of patterns to convey different kinds of perceptual effects and phenomena. These projects were highly abstract, engaging color, to create new kinds of effects and atmosphere. And we were really engaged in problems of building and assembly, frequently rethinking these through digital fabrication.
So the second phase that we sort of uncovered retrospectively was more focused on volumetric aggregation and what we were calling plaid or checkerboard patterns, where two very different spatial types of spaces are juxtaposed and integrated. So that might be solid and void, or inside and out, or light and dark, but they're united into a single sort of holistic organization. We were developing these projects through two-dimensional drawing, but really we were thinking about patterns that are inherently spatial and volumetric.
The third is really thinking about drawing and building through projection and perspectival illusion. Here, drawings are at first representational, meant to open multiple modes of engagement in a way that abstract pattern doesn't. Let's say characterizing the earlier two phases as being more abstract. Here, the relationship between representational and physical space creates a kind of cross-reference or intersection, and really interested to move between real and virtual space, recognizing that we are kind of in front of a constant flood of images, and considering how we might be able to use architecture and drawing in particular to move between these two different kinds of realms.
So we'll talk mostly about this third phase tonight. And we want to start with some research, or really this phase, I think, started with some research that we were doing into drawing and representational space historically. So that in particular is the tradition of architectural illusion and trompe-l'oeil from the Baroque period in Europe. So this is a ceiling fresco painted by Andrea Pozzo for San Ignazio, one of the Jesuit churches in Rome. And Pozzo was really responsible for both popularizing constructed perspective generally through this treatise that he wrote, which was very popular and just accessible, and then also for elaborating ways to pull the geometry of perspective drawing out in front of the picture plane, out into the space of the room where the viewer is standing. So the way he did that was he added a, let's see, is this a laser pointer?
Laser pointer?
On the back. Great. So the way he did that was to add a third point to the construction of perspective. So perspective, as shown on the left, has a vanishing point. All of those parallel lines converge, of course, moving away from us. That vanishing point also implies a viewpoint. So the little eye representing that viewpoint. Both of those points are in the space of the drawing. What Pozzo did was add the point represented by O, the station point or the standing point out in the room, and that allowed him to project a flat planar picture plane up onto the curved surface of a vault to take that two-dimensional drawing and make it more three-dimensional. So even in his own time, his work was critiqued as sort of a little bit of a cheap trick or one-liner. When you move off of that point, the illusion breaks down, the illusion changes. So in fact, often there's a disc in the floor where you're supposed to stand and look up. So unlike the contemporary illusions that we're surrounded with now all the time, illusions, video, virtual reality occasionally, these architectural illusion like this is really fragile. But in a contemporary context of all of these robust illusions, that fragility started to seem like a benefit potentially to us, something that would not be a liability. So taking this example, this is a church that he painted in Vienna. When you enter the church, stand in the middle of the nave on that disc, look up, what you see is on the left, the dome that seems to fit with the three-dimensional geometry of the ceiling. If you walk down the nave and look back, what you get is on the right, the dome is no longer circular. its axis seems to be almost more horizontal than vertical, so everything, the space of the painting has sort of rotated. So we were really interested in that ambiguity and that malleability of the representational space in architectural illusion. So this sort of launched us on a couple of projects which, number one, scale drawing up to the size of a room or a building, and number two, make that drawing three-dimensional through layering or through projection. So the first project was a competition to design a ceiling installation at the Renwick Gallery in Washington, D.C. The Renwick is a branch of the Smithsonian, the Applied Arts branch. And in the main gallery, they have a lot of events. So we were limited to 15 feet above the floor and up. And this is an early study model, which is essentially just a bunch of several printed, layered drawings, but eventually became a 2,500 square foot canopy. The Renwick Gallery building is a really interesting, notable Victorian era building. It's the first Second Empire style building in the US, and that stylistic eclecticism of that era became the content of what we would draw in these three-dimensional drawings. So we looked at 30 or 40 different buildings from the late 19th, early 20th centuries, looked at some of the interior spaces, and started to draw the ceilings of those spaces. We narrowed that down to 9 for the installation. In the end, each of them stylistically very different, but intricately patterned. And so we took those drawings, we projected them up onto a series of horizontal layers, and what we got through that was 2 volumes simultaneously. The physical volume that is created by cutting away the center of each drawing to reveal the layer above, and then the pictorial volume of that ceiling that we were drawing. Each drawing, as shown in the center, is a little hard to see, is drawn off-center in perspective. And so when you are on that point, you understand the space of the ceiling of the dome here. But when you move, as shown on the right, the space of that dome starts to tip. You see a different version, a kind of invented version of the same ceiling. Each ceiling is drawn from a different projection point. And so as you wander through the gallery, you occasionally come to one of these points where the layers align, where the drawing kind of snaps into focus a little bit. And then as you keep moving, those layers misalign, the space of the ceiling stretches and rotates or just sort of dissolves into more abstract pattern. So this is an example on the left looking from that projection point, and on the right from another nearby point. The drawings are printed on fabric, and then the fabric is cut to remove everything except the line work, and then stretched on an aluminum frame, and then those frames are hung horizontally. There's LED lighting embedded between the layers, focused up, pointed upward. This is water. Huh. All right. Thank you.
I'll pour.
Perfect.
You go ahead.
Okay, so this is that kind of hovering, glowing volume above you. So this ceiling is 80 feet long. It's very physically present when you're in that room, but it's also materially very indeterminate. It's really hard to understand what you're looking at physically. And so it has this quality of being both abstract and real at the same time. And it has what we were starting to call an Illustrator tectonic to it. If you are working on a drawing in Illustrator and you change the tip of the line to be curved rather than straight, the way that those lines pile up and are ordered in Illustrator, all of that became physically manifest in in the ceiling. And so this is the full installation in that room. The Renwick is great because it's free. It's in the central Washington business district, and so people come on their lunch breaks. They come for an afternoon and spend hours in there. It was really great to see how people engaged with the project. So we were a finalist for MoMA PS1, the Young Architects program last year, and we used that as an opportunity to develop some of these ideas about illusion and also some of the fabrication techniques that we had developed through the Smithsonian project. The Young Architects program designs an installation which hosts the warm-up series, a concert series. So there are 5,000 people in the courtyard of the museum every Saturday for these concerts. But we were really interested in two simultaneous audiences that are involved in the events, the people who are there, but also the hundreds of thousands who see the events through images and video online. So we were trying to address both of those audiences and produce a space which was simultaneously physical but also image-based. So the principal element of our proposal is this deep folded canopy, which is made of line work, much like the previous project. And so as a development of the parallax gap idea about the picture plane, if two-dimensional drawing has a flat planar picture plane, architectural illusion has a curving one, then what we were trying to do was fold the picture plane so that you would get a single drawing repeated multiple times as it's projected through that picture plane. This does a couple things. One is it objectifies the picture plane. It gives it a presence to compete with the pictorial content that it holds. And then it also multiplies the point of view as this drawing is multiplied at different angles. So more on that in a minute. But we were, in this case, in terms of content, what we were drawing the neighborhood around the museum of Long Island City, which is changing really quickly. And so we isolated 20 facades from the neighborhood, along with the sidewalk and objects in front of those buildings. And then we projected those in toward the center of the courtyard, toward the center of this triangular canopy. And as they're projected, they're repeated through this folded picture plane, through the canopy, at different scales, at different levels of resolution, at different distortions. So sometimes you seem to be looking from above at the building, sometimes from below. And so the viewer is situated in relationship to multiple instances of each drawing and simultaneously inhabiting multiple points of view. The other element of the proposal were these 15-foot tall drawings on the walls, nearby at the edges of the canopy. These are mapped through the same projection of those buildings to the center, but because they're much further from the center, they're much more zoomed in. They're much larger scale. So you see the details of the fenestration of the buildings, the different objects that are on the sidewalk in front of the buildings. We had also proposed to actually bring the official New York City sidewalk bench and other elements into the courtyard. But so the real intention of the installation in every case is to give shade to the event. And so in this case, the shadows are a second iteration of that same set of drawings that morph and change as the sun moves. And so some of those drawings are more recognizable or less at certain times of the day. And we try to replicate that effect by including lighting within this triangular truss, within that folded canopy at night. And so what we were really hoping to produce is a kind of occupiable image, that narrow gap between the shadows and the canopy was where the space was sort of compressed.
Okay, so I'd like to talk now about two built projects that extend the drawing at full scale into larger built structures. So this is a project that we designed and fabricated for Mini, the car company, as part of their recent series of mini cabin installations installed at art and design fairs in London, New York, Los Angeles, Tokyo, Shanghai, I think others now as well. These buildings are half micro-dwelling prototypes and half event spaces, and it's really meant to kind of build brand identity around this new company, Mini Living, that they're developing. So the direct prompt was to design a space to connect two standard modules provided by Mini. Those are kind of the white things on either side. Our interest was to take the cube of space that we were given and amplify its presence through multiplication of this volume in both real space and the space of the drawing. The cube is articulated through line while using its conceptual clarity as a primitive to layer in a new set of effects and illusions without losing that legibility. So this began with the literal multiplication of the volume at different scales and orientations. You can kind of see the rotation here. Volumes are suggested by their frames, 3 in total, which allude to the studs and joists of typical wall and ceiling framing. The walls are clad in printed 1/4-inch polycarbonate and create a kind of translucent envelope that folds in between these different cubes. Printed on the polycarbonate is the image of the cube frame projected back onto itself. The rotation of the image creates the fourth and most dynamic of the cubes, which hovers within the space between the two chunks that were created by Mini. Projected perspectively, the image snaps into clarity at the entry from the elevator to the rooftop installation. So this thing is installed on top of the row complex in downtown Los Angeles. You can kind of see the skyline of LA beyond here. The cube image unfolds, overriding the reading of the real studs to suggest a cube unhinged and floating between the space of the image and the cabin. The image of the cube really only works in 3D. So this is an unfold of the printed polycarbonate panels, tracing out the kind of projection of the cube. But as a kind of flat plane, it invents a kind of a new image of the cube itself. The flattening of the images produces a new kind of spatial implication. The frame is not just an index of the relationship between image and volume. It draws out a new set of spaces. The collapse of the physical framework and image is complicated by real effects related to light, reflection, and material. Frame is both a measure of these effects and also their substance. So you can see the sort of the shadows of the printing projected onto the slightly reflective studs, like on the ceiling. Views from the two sides of the mini fabricated modules. These kind of carried all the functional elements of the home. The one that we're kind of looking from here is the kitchen and bathroom. This is looking from the bedroom or office side back into the kitchen. A second project that takes up a similar kind of theme and interest is the Hungry Man offices, which we designed for this film production company in Los Angeles. It's situated in an existing steel frame warehouse building. The client asked us to rethink the organization of the office and bring a new identity to the space, one that resonated with the kind of lighthearted character of the work that they do. So they make commercials, they make the funny ones that play in between the Super Bowl sort of plays, and they really wanted a space that had that kind of lighthearted character. And so we thought about rethinking the cubicle itself as a kind of playful thing that could be stacked and introduced a degree of irregularity and dynamic qualities to the everyday office. Loosely organized across the large open floor area, the informal arrangement of office spaces creates a diversity of stable and flexible working configurations. Feigning randomness, the cubicles are calibrated to support specific relationships between staff while leaving adjacent breakout spaces open and flexible. So this is a company that changes in size quite radically between different kinds of projects. So there's a kind of core portion to the company, which is kind of on the left-hand side, where is this on the back? Yeah. Which is on the back side, which appeared to be kind of informal at first, but in fact all these offices face each other to create a kind of conversation space in between. They kind of shout to each other, and then there's these kind of breakout spaces which can be used for project teams, but also create these kinds of smaller and differently scaled informal meeting spaces in between. So in addition, cubicle boxes piled up to make visually prominent display and projection areas. So these are the ones kind of on top. And they also kind of take advantage of the generous ceiling height in the warehouse building. This piling is further extended through the drawing out of a multiple arrays of cubes, which are then projected as images back on the office cubicles as full-scale drawings. These are the ones which are dotted here. These tumbling cubes are reproduced graphically in the finished treatment of surfaces with CNC milled MDF and painted details. From specific points of view, these articulated surfaces create spatial illusions and a lively, dynamic work atmosphere. The line work of the paneling reflects and augments the corrugated metal cladding of the existing steel warehouse building. And you'll see some of that in the photographs. This is one of the mock-ups. Here we're testing hot wire cutting foam in different patterns. Based on the sort of qualities of light, you get this exaggerated graphic depth, but also at the corners, this kind of new figure as the bevel cut comes together and produces this new kind of silhouette. These are some of the finished details. The bevel cut of the mill produces almost like different line weight lines, all kind of coming together to suggest these multiply arrayed cubes. So here the projections arrive through loose rotations, anchored to box corners rather than precisely calibrated perspectives. This is a view from inside one of the offices. Very important to keep the tops of these open as well for light and air to kind of flow through, but that also makes another series of apertures kind of looking up at the existing warehouse shell and the boxes that pile on top. And these things really are much more precarious than maybe some of the photos suggest. They were kind of a structural problem as well to try to create this degree of informality. In addition to the office design, we were asked to put together a furniture package. Desks, couches, tables throughout the office, which for budget reasons the client never actually purchased. But we still wanted to have some of that kind of quality in the final photographs that we took. And so rather than photograph the space empty, we decided to design and fabricate our own paper furniture set that extended the playful graphic and spatial ambiguity of the boxes. So the paper furniture, half graphic and half real, questions the box's utility and destabilizes the images. And we thought we had this whole kind of game, this kind of side conversation happening in the office about kind of graphic illusion until this arrived in my Instagram feed one night. This is from the Christmas party setup that the film production company, I mean, they have a great deal of experience with these kinds of effects. They projection map this line work in relation to the music back onto the cubes themselves, apparently kind of playing off of our own sorts of sensibility, which is really fun to see.
So we'll close with two residential projects, both of which were developed in different ways through ideas related to drawing. The first one is on a steep hillside site north of downtown LA. And this is a type of site that we were familiar with, that we had done work in before. And so this is a project that we developed ourselves as an office. We purchased the lot and designed the project and then sold it this year. Last year in the fall. So in terms of the design, like the Hunger Man interiors, we were interested in how loosely stacked volumes could make space between and around them. And in terms of this house, it really started with an idea about scale. So this is had to be a 4-story house, given the steepness of the slope, but it's in a modest neighborhood in LA. So we were interested in the dominant scale of the house being that of the room rather than the whole mass. And so what we tried to do through a kind of line work on the exterior was to articulate these volumes differently. So you have two types of kind of customized board and batten siding, one of which produces stripes, one of which produces concentric frames, and those articulate the front and the sides of each box. And we tried to produce an alternation between front and side. These are the views from the corner, which is really how you approach the house from the street. And it's from those views that the informality of the stack is most visible. But even on the backside, where it's really volumetrically, the boxes are not articulated, the siding tries to describe them, or to break down the house into these smaller room-sized volumes. At the front, there's a series of outdoor spaces that are on top of and underneath the boxes as they swing out, as they rotate, and you climb up from one to the next from the street level. So you have the garage level, and then on the second level you have a accessory dwelling unit or an office, a pretty independent little living space. That's the view here, and then you climb up to the main living level, which is on the 3rd floor to this space, this exterior space. And here again you can see the way that the different sides of the volumes are articulated differently on the exterior. So the plan of these two levels is a very simple 4-square box with 4 rooms. On the living level, what we did was we introduced a series of arcing walls at the center, which removed a corner, the inner corner of each room, but tied the rooms together and also removed or multiplied the sense of orientation that you have when you're inside. So rather than a 4-sided room, you get something which peels away and into the neighboring spaces. This is that main living level, looking in toward the center of the house. And so what you get are views and entry of each room at the corner or at the edge rather than on axis. And you get a series of these multiplied knife-edged divisions which kind of splice together multiple rooms in your view and in your experience of the house.
Okay, so another house to talk about. This is what we call second house. We completed this last year, and it's literally the second house on this property, which kind of gave it its name. So in the foreground is an existing home. Client was interested to build a second house on the property that they would inhabit. It's a house for a couple. They wanted to maintain the existing one, and it's quite a tight site. It's very packed in around the surrounding residential context. These are kind of accessory buildings mostly in the back of single-family home parcels. So the main street's kind of on this side, but there's an alley across the back. So there's this other way accessing the site. And one kind of thing in particular that the client was interested in was this notion of a complex roof line, the multiple dormers, really gave the existing house its character and made it quite unusual. And so that started a kind of conversation about the profile and silhouette of the second house. Very constrained massing envelope, and because of the foreground, how tight it was, one of the issues was how to open up the house to a kind of exterior space. This suggested that somehow we had to incorporate that exterior space into the footprint of the home. And so we settled on this idea of kind of a centralized courtyard, but also this notion of kind of alternating between interior and exterior space to incorporate both of these into the sort of the ritual and qualities of the house. So these are the three kind of masses of the house, and then their corresponding exterior spaces. So I mentioned there was both kind of front and back access to the house. This led to an idea about the openings into the home, the front and back doors, or rather kind of two doors, neither front or back. You slip into the house as opposed to marking a clear entry, and at the same time, the interior space begins to slip out. And you can see the sort of strategy for how to deal with this unfortunate kind of very compressed foreground. It's not to place windows at a lower level, but to place them quite high on walls to allow light in and capture views to the sky, part of the introverted character of the house. The entry from the existing home side, double heighted. As you enter, you see the courtyard, the central volume around which the house is organized. It both articulates, along with the planter, each of the different volumes, but it's also what unifies it into a single larger space. The footprint is very tight. The garage occupies quite a bit of the lower level, and this is the courtyard in the middle, and the two different entries from the side. This is the kitchen and dining kind of living area. It closely connects to the courtyard. It's a kind of corresponding space for dining, and quite a small living room, which is made more voluminous by making it double heighted. The notion of, I wanted to talk about one other thing here. So in the sort of cutting up of the plan with the walls that kind of also guide the entry into the space, there's a kind of flipping back and forth, almost a kind of checkerboard between these two different conditions of interior and exterior. And you can't quite see it here. There's a kind of material articulation that goes along with it, which you can see a little bit more here, where the materials that alternate between this limestone and wood don't necessarily correspond between interior and exterior, but help to both define spaces while also creating these continuities between interior and exterior. And so this notion of flipping back and forth, we thought creates a rather curious spatial condition, a rather interesting one, this ambiguity of being between the two. The flip sections here, a cut which is kind of opened up like a kind of a book, show simultaneously the spaces looking in either direction. Here's the courtyard from several different angles. This from the sitting, eating area, and the kitchen. From the opposite side, this is from the small living area. You can see that kind of the dining. Also, the way that the wall of the garage and the way it extends along the face of the building also allows that space to kind of slide out and capture some of the exterior space to extend the sense of this rather small interior. Double-heighted living area, similar kind of idea that opens out to the courtyard, and a custom light fixture which takes on the form of that double-story volume and really treats it as a kind of surface to project line work onto a kind of a large light fixture at night. The kitchen opens directly out into the courtyard. Fire pit echoes the sort of form of the planter. At the second level, there's two separate bedroom wings. The primary master wing connected by the stair, what was nearly a kind of separate entry for the guest wing on the opposite side, more modest in size. These stairs were painted with brightly colored walls on the wall you can't see to create this kind of transitional space. Color begins to leak out from the reflection of these walls, creating soft textured light, which kind of creates a nice variation throughout the house. It's the master suite. The master terrace looks out over the Baldwin Hills, kind of in between the buildings here and over this profile of the living room. Throughout, the cement board wraps around each of these volumes, and this is really kind of taking what is otherwise a very clearly parted project, clearly parted house, and kind of stitching it back together with the tile pattern of the rain screen system. Final view. The drone was a particularly interesting way to photograph the house because it was so tight and also opened up these other kinds of views and other ways of seeing, which is maybe one way to kind of introduce kind of the closing thing we'd like to talk about. We've just shown a bunch of images and drawings that represent the house. And coming back to kind of the beginning of the talk, we wanted to take some of these images and pull them away from that reference of the house directly to maybe look at how images might create a new set of spaces and a new set of volumes. So our interest was to experiment with the photographs themselves using ideas of perspectival projection and trompe l'oeil, and then mapping interior volumes onto an exterior surface of objects. So based on some of these projection points, we began to pull the photographs projected on both sides of this volume to create another set of spatial qualities. This is not the physical model itself, but a digital model which shows that kind of technique. So at moments, the kind of photograph is entirely distorted. The really interesting moments are where there's a kind of ambiguity between what is in and out in the photograph as a result of how it's been pulled either in or out of this volume. Between the two sides, it creates a kind of mirrored plane between front and back, and maybe opens up the question of what is the back side of the photograph. There's a clear sort of reference back to the original photograph, but also a misreading of space and material, and suggests that the image might become a kind of working method. Yeah. One more of these. This is the Liberator of Space, which has had such a kind of unusual profile to it. Also creates a very kind of unusually proportioned volume as a result. I think a little bit of it's being cut off down here. So moving around the objects, you get this kind of concave to convex effect and collapse of physical and virtual space. Basically making a new set of spaces out of the material of the house, sometimes symmetrical, sometimes doubled. So we can wrap on this. The unrolling of these volumes, so this is one of the volumes laid flat. The unrolling of these volumes creates a new image of the space and a new spatial proposition of its own, Like some of the earlier installation and research work that we presented tonight, these image volumes describe our latest set of interests working with images. Like the drawings that generated projects like Parallax Gap or PS1, the PS1 proposal, the image object collapses the space of representation with physical space. The image unreal here departs from representation to invite new ways of seeing and forming space. Thank you.
Thanks.